is we don't have a whole lot of military presence above the Arctic Circle. We have one Space Force base in northern Greenland with a few hundred people, and that's sort of it for us. Our partners, our partner nations do have obviously much more up north, and then this is Russia's militarization of the Arctic. In terms of if this was just a numbers game or we were playing that board game Risk, we'd be way behind, we'd be losing. And so I think looking at this is somewhat sobering and gives me a sense of urgency, having spent a fair bit of time up there and also understanding where we are in terms of training and resources for operating in this environment. So we don't have a wealth of experience practicing medicine up there. We just don't. And some of our partner nations do. And one of the things I'm going to call for is perhaps a somewhat centralized location or a coordination between the partners. So we have a place where we have this information in one spot. We need to improve the ability of our medics, not just to survive, but to operate efficiently in this environment. And I hear this over and over again in the cold, and I hear it actually in official U.S. military documents as well, as like cold is the enemy, you know, the cold is trying to kill you, and we need to get away from that. Because if we're fighting the cold, then we're not fighting the enemy, right? And being in the cold is it's not difficult, but it takes some practice. You have to get used to it. It has to just become normal. So I also want to point out that the greatest need is in initial care, and that's the greatest need for a couple of reasons. One, if the casualty doesn't make it past the point of injury, we just lost, right? We lost the game. And then secondly, the point of injury medications and tools are the ones I'm most interested in, because those are the ones that are going to be exposed to the freezing cold environment, extreme cold. After that, once somebody gets evac'd, we have the ability to put them in a heated space, and then it's sort of medicine as usual. Maybe austere medicine, but medicine as usual. So the initial care, that's what I'm most interested in supporting. So here's a rough estimate of U.S. military bases, and how many of those are in extreme cold environments. I mean, maybe North Dakota, maybe Minnesota sometimes, but not a whole lot. And this is how we grow up as Americans. We don't hang out in super cold spaces. There are very few places that you grow up where you're hanging out in extreme cold. This is your average Norwegian child just rolling around in the snow having a great time. Okay, maybe that's not true. But our partners in the Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, they grow up in the cold. It's a normal thing. They take the dog for a walk, they take the garbage out, they walk to school, and that's normal. And we don't have that nearly as much as other countries do. And so what we need to do is get to the point where being in the cold is just a normal thing. So this is a list of medications that I am most interested in, and it includes CBURN medications. But this is a list of medications that I came up with in conjunction with Titus Rund and a few other folks in terms of medications of interest to medics specifically. There are obviously a bunch of other medications we use in tactical medical care, but there are things like amiodarone and things that you're not going to have at the point of injury. So these are the point of injury medications I'm most interested in, and these are the ones that I would like to pull out as the ones that we'll use in the most urgent situations. So this is just my thought. And I am looking for input from people like, yeah, that one, no, that one, please add this one. That's what I'm looking for. And that list that you see right here is in the survey. And it basically, the first question is, which of these medications would you add and which would you remove? And I need your help with that, specifically from the standpoint of a medic. That's what I'm looking for. In yellow, we have the CBURN medications, which are also very important. They're kind of an animal unto themselves, and we will definitely test those next winter in Alaska. And so I'm actually asking for your help a little bit more with the red ones. Are those the medications that are medications of interest to a medic, point of injury type of medications? I'm looking for you to answer that question for me. Okay, what about meds? Well, it's easy, right? We can just read the package insert on medications, except we can't, because most medications, the data, stability data, is from super controlled artificial environments. Like this is a pharmacy, right? And then this is Arctic Combat. They're different, radically different. And not only are they different in the temperature, but also in what happens. So what I will do next winter is take medications and test them in a field environment, which means I'm not just testing how the medications do, but I'm also testing how the packaging does. I'll pull them in a sled, I'll carry them on my person, and have other people do that as well, because the packaging is really important as well. If the medication is stable and it's fine, well, that's great. But if the packaging cracks, if the ampules crack and the medication, runs out on the ground, that doesn't really help us. So what we need to do is see functionally how well does this work. And so by pharmaceutical convention, here's room temperature and here's controlled room temperature. And in a field environment, we're going to have a hard time maintaining temperatures like that. So, as I said, most of the data we have is from an ideal environment. Packaging, temperature cycling, mechanical stress, all that kind of stuff is really important to test. And sometimes you can get hairline cracks in syringes and ampules, and we need to know if that's the case, because that will compromise the sterility of the medication and perhaps the stability. So we just don't have a lot of solid data on medications under temperature extremes or when carried in the field. We just don't have a lot of data. So there's this article that tested a bunch of medications, but if you look carefully, it says entries in bold indicates the information is based on personal communication only. Now, I'm not tearing down the authors of this, because it's a demonstration of how little actual solid data we have. And if you look at how many of these are in bold, that's a ton. And that's just personal communication, which means somebody was like, yeah, I carried it. Yeah, it seemed to work okay, right? That's not data, is it? That's not data. And then statements in parentheses indicate argument by analogy if data is not available or don't cover the full range of temperature. So once again, it's actually not data. There are a lot of caveats here. So we have this information that we've been drawing on, and we have a bunch of it, but this all says the same thing. If you look at how many of the yeses and nos are in bold, that's anecdotal. That is not data. That is not science. So I think it's really important to look at the old data that we have, or the old information we have, and actually try to collect some true data. So we know that there are a variety of things that can influence the shelf life and the sterility of the medications, right? Hairline cracks in the syringe. There are substances that'll leach during temperature cycling, heat, cold, leach into the medication. Glass containers they're the most stable, but they can actually leach into the medication. And then specific preservatives may be more or less stable. Well, a lot of the data we have, or a lot of the information we have, is 10, 15, 20 years old. And so there are new preservatives. There are new ways to manufacture these medications. So we actually haven't tested what we have. There's the molecule that's the active medication, but then there's a bunch of other stuff in there as well. And that has changed over time, and we haven't tested that. There's some other studies. They looked at storing medications in vehicles and EMS vehicles. EMP vehicle is the emergency medicine physician vehicle. And you can see wide temperature ranges. And this is where they were trying to keep the medications within a range that would allow for them to remain stable. So leaving something in a helicopter, in an ambulance, in a vehicle out in the field is not typically an effective way to maintain stability. In one of the studies, we found that these compounds were stable. So medication is considered stable if it retains 90% of its efficacy. That's the definition. So these ones, negative 20 Celsius for 28 days continuously. So here's some medications that were on that list. And this was the National Park Service actually did a study called hot and cold drugs, and they went through a bunch of the medications. Many of those do cross over to the ones that our medics will be using, but once again, this is older information. It's at the N is small, and in addition, the medications have changed since then. So there are some that, it's good to see. The narcotics, atropine, naloxone, are relatively stable. This is what I found when I looked through, and there was one of our Swedish partners yesterday in another lecture was talking about the difficulty in finding data, good data on medication efficacy after freezing or temperature cycling, and also the difficulty in finding packaging that's going to work well. So, here we got, and what I did is I looked at a bunch of data, and at the top, I kind of summed it up. Atropine freezing, probably okay, but the packaging breaks a bunch. And BLT, so I call that base layer transport. So I'm just going to introduce that concept. So one of the things they talked about yesterday also in this ARCIC capabilities talk was about how the medic ends up with all this stuff under their coat. You're walking around, you got all these medicines, and you got some IV fluid bags, you got all this stuff in your coat. You're walking around like I think it's a Christmas tree. You got all this stuff, which is hard to do. And depending on where it is in relation to your body and how cold it is, you could have it under your parka and you could still have it freeze. When it's negative 40 Fahrenheit, things freeze, even inside your coat. So I call BLT as base layer transport, and I came up with these. It's basically a merino wool zip tee. You cut the arms off and sew pockets on the sides. And the pockets to put the medication in, you can put a 250 ml IV bag and some other meds. And myself and Stephen Brooks, during the Alaska exercise last winter, we carried a bunch of meds around like this. The idea is that they are here on the sides, they're up against your skin, and they're out of the way. And actually, I've stopped noticing that I even had these medications in this vest. So it's a base layer. The other thing we did that I'll show you in just a minute is we used a temperature sensor on the skin just under this base layer that measured what the actual temperature of our skin was, which we can extrapolate the temperature of the medications. So that's when you see BLT, that's base layer transport. Probably okay, because base layer, if it's up against your skin, most of that cycled between like 30 and 37 degrees Celsius, which is a pretty good temperature range for most medications. So there's a bunch of, some of this, the actual bioactivity of the drugs was not tested. There's just not a lot of really good data. There's a lot of information, but not a lot of great data. Calcium gluconate, we don't know. Either dexamethasone, probably not, but it's good at the temperature of base layer transport. Diazepam for a short period of time, actually maybe okay, as long as you unfreeze it appropriately. Base layer transport for a short period of time is good. After 210 days at a higher temperature, 37 degrees Celsius, it reduced the efficacy to like 25%, so that's not good. But that's 210 days. How many medics are going to be out in the field for 210 days with a bunch of diazepam? So we need to narrow down our look at something that's more specific to how our medics will be carrying stuff. So instead of 210 days, maybe 3 days, 7 days, 10 days, something like that. Epi, which I always believed couldn't freeze, that's not good for it, actually seems as though it is okay to freeze. Hydromorphone. So once again, the point of flashing all these things up here is that there's a lot of information that is contradictory. And what I want to do is get some solid answers so that our medics can use medications with confidence and know how they should be stored and how they shouldn't be stored. Iloprost, which is the medication for frostbite, which is funny because you need to figure out if that's going to freeze or not. And that's currently under investigation with the Air Force at University of Cincinnati. So I guess the point is all the contradictory information here. Once again, and this isn't even all of our medications. So some practical tips and tricks. How do you carry this stuff? Well, I've seen people use the fly fishing vest. I've seen that, and that's okay. But there are a couple of things. That is not base layer transport because it's outside the body. You could have a multiple layers of insulation underneath that. The other thing is that traps moisture, and moisture is your enemy, right? When you're in the extreme cold, you do not want to get sweaty. You don't do that. When you're at high altitude, whatever you do not get sweaty, because then you slow down and then you freeze. So those are okay, but you got to be careful about moisture transport, and also how many layers do you have. If you have a couple base layers and a puffy underneath that vest, it's possible that medication could freeze. People carry a little butt pack. I've done that before. I did that at high altitude. I did that on Everest, carrying a bunch of medications there. Got to the tent, tired, taking my boots off, took it off, set it down, left it there for 15 minutes, and everything was frozen. So the problem with that, something that you can just take off your body, is that you eventually will take it off your body. And you'll set it down, and it takes almost no time at -40 for things to freeze. And that's why I'm a huge fan of the base layer transport, because moisture moves through it. It's just another layer. It's next to your skin, and you can get in and out of these pockets on the side. I also have a prototype where you just have, Velcro, so you can Velcro on whatever components you want to be carrying at any particular time. Oops. There we go. So Life Lens, this is a super cool sensor that we used in Alaska. It's like a tick, basically. It's, a little bigger than a tick. It's like the end of your finger. And it's this sticky thing. You put a sticky strip on, you stick this thing on there. It's good for 2 days. And it doesn't just do temperature, it does humidity, it does acceleration, deceleration. It does hundreds of different biometrics. It's a super cool sensor. We only used it for temperature because that's all that I was really interested in. But this is data that I got from some SOFM 25, which was up near Fairbanks this winter. So I had people wearing this next to their skin. And if you look up high, it's hard to see the temperature scale, but it's time on the right, temperature is vertical. And that line across the top, that's between 30 and 37 degrees pretty much. So that was when that sensor was stuck right underneath the medications, right underneath the base layer for base layer transport. And if you look at it, it's pretty consistent. This is several different people, a bunch of different people, and this is over days and days. And you can see that line, there are a bunch of lines right on top of each other. The lines below, so there are a lot of medics that carry medications in a med box, and they'll put hand warmers in them, or they'll keep them close here. They have all these different strategies. And so I had a few people carrying stuff in med boxes. Those are the lines below, the brown, the dark blue, the green. And you can see there's so much more variability. And one of the things I wanted to look at was, can you really manage those medications appropriately? And the answer is, well, maybe. None of them got down below freezing, but it actually wasn't that cold when we were doing it. So I will do this again next winter. But as you can see, the variability of temperature when meds are in a med box is much bigger and much less predictable. I also sent one of these sensors up, and this is just a heat and temp and humidity sensor. And I think it's made for shipping sensitive items across the country or something like that. You can pick this up in real time. But there is a dust-off medic out of Fort Wainwright, Zeke Mendoza, and so he carried this for a while in his med box. And so, once again, there's a bunch of raw data and data I'd like to collect more of. But just looking at how well he was able to manage that the temperature in the med box. Here are some tips and tricks that he suggested. And in terms of cold weather medical operations, I mean, Fort Wainwright is really, that's our cold place, really. That's our coldest place. And the medics there that go out and do rescues, that is our best example of people that frequently are operating in an extreme cold environment. So these are suggestions of, that Mendoza provided. And, this little pelly case, putting it under insulating layers to keep it warm enough, and then making a loop so it's under your clothes, but you can kind of pull it out of your clothes. That is key, but that's also the problem, like I explained, I had all these meds with me when I was getting on Everest, and then, it was awkward. I took them off because I was doing something else and forgot about them. You can do the same thing with this. Although if you make it so you just spin it and pull stuff out, then you're not going to ever take it off your body. Once again, I'm an advocate of base layer transport because human bodies stay warm. Some tips and tricks putting in vials, cutting up a ready heat, putting some HRAP in there so it doesn't, the heat doesn't go directly onto the medications. Here's more ideas. So these are great ideas. These are, great. It's great innovation, right? But it's kind of hard. You forget, and the ready heat stops, going. The hand warmers stop working. Here's something interesting. You can use this our correct roll-up pouch and put syringes in there, and then put some hand warmers in it, and then put it in your magazine pouch. Like, these are great, workarounds. Here's some blood. This is for keeping blood warm. So the thing is, we've got all these workarounds, but we should be better than that. They shouldn't be like cutting little pieces out of ready heats and stuff like that. We need to have tools that'll actually work for our medics, so they're not having to do a little craft projects the night before they go out to do something. We need actual inventions that work. So here's some other stuff talking about fluid warmers. Your standard fluid warmers, they struggle to keep blood and fluids warm enough. They do not keep blood warm enough. And when we're talking about blood, actually there's some studies as well about heat packs are not effective in keeping IV fluids warm enough to provide. And blood, what we find, because we've done a lot of drawing blood and trying to re-administer it, it clots. It clots at every single kink in the tubing. Sometimes the tubing just fractures when it's that cold. So what we have now is not working. It's not effective, and we need to figure out what to do about that. Because once you start getting clotting, so let's say you drew some blood from somebody, you're going to give it to somebody else, you just burned a whole unit of blood, right? It clots. You can't give it to the person that needed it, and you can't give it back to the person who gave it out. So we really need some solid solutions to these problems. Some of the commonly used kits get rigid and brittle below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're talking about operating in -20 to -40. So we need some better answers. Here's the path forward. Identify the highest priority medications, because we can't do them all at once. And that's what I'm looking for your help with. Identify the temperature range. So basically, I would say, can they freeze or not? If they can freeze, you can carry them wherever. If they can't, can you do the base layer transport for them? If they can freeze, appropriate thawing techniques, and then identify a handling profile for the packaging to keep them sterile and safe, and then design some packaging to prevent the problems that we're seeing. And design packaging, is great that Mendoza has all these workarounds, but I think we need to be better than that. We need to have something that's made for this, where they can just put the meds in and go, and they can rely on it. So we are siloed up in this case as well. I'm looking for all this information. I'm hearing some of our partners looking for the similar information. What I'm looking for is suggestions for a place where we can put all this information together, so we're not all trying to gather information over and over again. And then we can also do some high quality research and provide that information to our partners working in extreme cold environments, so that we can help each other out and stand on the shoulders of the giants. So siloing up is not the answer. So these are some of our sensor carriers. I just want to say thanks to those folks. And any questions?
That's it for today's podcast. Make sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org. Check out our free downloads and a ton of other helpful information. Grab a bag of our fresh roasted PFC coffee, links in the description below, and stay on the bleeding edge of combat and austere medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC podcast, out.